And yeah, I think those are the announcements that I want to make. And let's begin with the actual subject for today's class, which is about web design. So let me open the slide. Okay, cool. I'm setting the questions to accept anything from anyone instead of users with Google Workspace account. And yeah, let's begin. So today we will try to shift our focus from the back-end part, i.e. the business logic and data persistence components in the Django web application, to the part where we begin to design the interface or the lookalike that will be displayed on user's browser. So we will design how the information based on the data that we store in the application will be displayed in the user's web browser. And in order to do that, we will use HTML and CSS. So the agenda will be about HTML. So we will see several a more in-depth explanation on HTML tags. And the latest standard at this point is HTML5 with several additions to the set of valid text that can be added into a page. And then HTML usually only for layouting the web page. If we want to provide style to the page, for example, we want to provide color to the background and also to the fonts in the web page, then we usually will use CSS, cascading style sheets, to style the elements in the pages. And currently, the latest standard is CSS3. And while we are discussing at HTML and CSS, we will also discuss about how static files or assets are handled in Django. Yeah, in the tutorial, you probably have seen that the CSS and HTML used in the tutorial are loaded from external sources, from jsdeliver.net, if I remember correctly. But actually, there will be some benefits and also disadvantages of using a remotely loaded CSS and JavaScript assets compared to the CSS and JavaScript assets that are included in the app. We will see the difference later on. So let's start with HTML. So I have this question here, and probably you already know the answer, but I just want to make sure. What do you think about HTML? Is it a programming language or not? You can answer yes or no via the link provided in the slide. So what do you think? Let me check the responses. Well, interesting. Okay, I still only have one response. So for those of you who are currently opening the menti.com page, please respond with your answer. Is HTML a programming language or not? What do you think? Can we implement a hello world in HTML, like defining a function that will compute something? or it is simply impossible to create a program just by using HTML code? Is there any responses now? Let me refresh the page. Okay, interesting. There are 7 persons that opening the menti.com, but now 8. But now the responses are only 1. Interesting. Not 1. Oh, I misread the result. So everyone responded with, everyone apparently agrees that HTML is not a programming language. Why is that? Could somebody explain or share their thoughts why HTML is not a programming language?
May I answer the question, sir?
Sure, please.
For me, is it because HTML couldn't work on itself and there's nothing is working when you only have HTML alone? That's what I really get, sir. Thank you.
Okay. No worries, Dylan. Good answer. To put it in layman terms, HTML cannot compute. So HTML can only define how a page should look like in terms of the layout. The look-alike is actually defined in CSS, but the purpose of HTML is solely only for layouting the elements. And we cannot have a function like, for example, in ordinary programming languages, you can create a function to compute addition of 2 numbers or transforming a string. That's possible in another programming languages, but not that case in HTML. HTML only defines the layout, which will be parsed by the web browser so that the documents containing the strings and also the link to the images and so on can be displayed in the web browser. The actual HTML itself cannot compute anything. The one that performs computation actually the web browser that reads the HTML file. And also there is someone in the private chat, Nafis, mentioned about Markdown and it is just for displaying. Yeah, thank you, Nafis. That's true. So HTML is only for defining how the content should be like organized in a page. HTML itself cannot compute, cannot have a computation related functionality. If we want to make a page that can compute something, like have a page that compute the results of addition from 2 input fields, then we can do it client side by using JavaScript, which we will cover in next week, or handle the computation by sending the inputs to the server side. That is, submit the input to a web application like Django. But later on, in your further studies, you will encounter what is called automata and primitive language in this course, also known as discrete math 3. So in automata course, you will see why in theory HTML is not a programming language. You will see the reasoning in that course later on. So yeah, that's a quick icebreaker for the beginning of the session today. And let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, I've explained this before. So HTML already be created by Tim Berners-Lee from early 90s, and it already evolved several times, especially in between 1999 and early and before 2010. I think there should be something here about HTML, but yeah, we forgot to put it there. So in between 1999 to 2012, there's a period that XHTML is formalized, which basically making HTML standard follow strictly to XML. So every text must be closed, for example. However, seems nobody cares about that. And eventually, the standard get revised, and now we have HTML5. But yeah, I remember back then, few years or many years ago, I learned web design while the current standard was XHTML. That was the standard back then. But now we already reached HTML5. And the differences are not that great. I mean, in HTML 1.0, Tim Berners-Lee and the others already defined several texts that still exist until now, but there were also several texts that already been deprecated or not used in the recent HTML standard. But in essence, in general, most of the text from earlier HTML still exists until now. And especially in HTML5, they added more text that provide more features to the web pages and structure as well. So previously, before HTML5, if we want to define certain sections in the page, like we want to have the header part, the main content, and also the footer, we had to use div containers. But now there are specific tags for defining footer, defining the main content, and also the header. So semantically, we can define page layouts more natural instead of making a synthetic construct of the required layout using div container. Okay, so next page. And in overall, usually an HTML page will have the head, i.e. the header element that usually contain the metadata of the page. And then the main content will be rendered in the body. So in the body, you will put all of the content that will be displayed to the user's web browser. For example, if you take a look at this web page, this is the web page at Mozilla Developer Network. So this is a very good source to learn more about web design. So they already provide some guides on HTML, CSS, and also JavaScript. So you can check this out later. Yeah, let's take an example of that page, the page about document and website structure. You can see that the page that rendered by the web browser is based on this HTML content. So if we look to the source code, Usually by using Ctrl U, we can see the actual HTML source that is read by the web browser and display it to this page that we are currently looking at. And several elements or HTML text in that page can be observed, like the one that is highlighted in this cyan colored box. It's related to this heading part in the document. So it is defined as a section that has a class attribute that will be related to CSS that we will cover in subsequent slides. And in that section, it contains a header. And in the header, it defines the title of the document and website structure, and then it also contains the navigational links to the next pages or to the parent of this page. And then the text below the cyan colored box is related to the main body of the content. And the HTML text there in the orange colored box is rendered by the web browser to look like in the slide. And lastly, the blue colored box at the bottom, it defines the next section of the document, and the content is as follows in the slide. So the content that is displayed by your web browser is based on the HTML document that is read by the web browser from the web server. And as I mentioned before, HTML comprises of tags or elements. So first we have this start tag. So start tag is the opening of a tag. For example, title is a tag that will define the text that will be displayed in the window of your web browser. So in this example, the Google Slides will the tab that displaying this slide presentation contains a title tag with values of the title of the presentation itself. And if we look at the example from Mozilla Developer Network, the title tag here where is it? It is not that visible, but it's somewhere out there. So they actually have several title tags. Interesting. How about the head itself? This is the head. Yeah, it's somewhere. This one. So the Mozilla page has this title, and the content is document and website structure. It matches with the one that is displayed by the web browser. And since title is a tag with a closing tag, obviously it will needs to be closed. So most of the tags in HTML needs to be defined in pair. So most of them will have a start tag and also the end tag. But there also exists HTML tag that doesn't have a closing pair, like the one just below the title tag in the slide. IMG tag doesn't have a closing pair, so it can be closed immediately. Or in other words, IMG tag is a self-closing tag. Now, in HTML tags that need closing pair, usually we can put a content in between of the start and the end tags. For example, the title we can put the element content, that is the page title string. And then the attack can also have attribute, and that attribute will define or determine how the text should be treated or parsed by the web browser. In this example, the src attribute contains the link where the web browser should load an image. So in this example, the image that will be loaded by the web browser is sourced from https://http://200.jpg, and that will be the image displayed in the web browser. And yeah, as I mentioned before, HTML can have attributes. Usually it's defined in the start tag. It comes with name value pairs, similar to like Python's dictionary. You can have key and then the value, or JavaScript object. Similar, you can also have a pair of property and the assigned value. So in this example, the img tag contains 3 attributes, src, and then the width and also the height. And that information will determine how the web browser will display or understand the HTML tag. In the example, the web browser will set the width of the image to be 600 pixels, and then the height is set to 1800 pixels. But yeah, even though we can define the dimension of the image, usually any attempt to provide styles to an HTML tag should be delegated to CSS file. So we can have a proper focus on the responsibility of each elements, or no, in each elements that form the web page. So HTML is solely used for layouting the web page, and then CSS is solely only for providing style to the web page. And yeah, before I continue to the next slides, any questions so far regarding HTML? Not yet. Yeah, let me monitor something. Yeah, still no questions. Okay, next. All right. Since early 2000, well, not early 2000, it is actually already an issue since back then, since old days. The support to display HTML and also the CSS are varying across web browsers. So there were, back then in the past, it was quite often it was quite often to find some CSS that is only compatible to run on specific browser. So one CSS syntax can only run on Google Chrome, but then in Firefox it will not be loaded, and vice versa. And apparently it is still a thing until now. So yeah, even though web developers already trying to follow the existing standard like the HTML5 and CSS3 that are defined by a consortium or a group comprising of the best engineers from various companies that has stake in the web development industry. But yeah, they already tried to standardize, and there are still some or maybe few HTML or CSS syntaxes that can only be loaded in specific browser. But yeah, at least it is better at now. Back then, it's quite drastically different, the support between each browser. And yeah, thankfully, not thankfully, but yeah, this is the proof of technological progress over time. IE is already deprecated, so most of the web browser used by the people now are using either Chrome or Firefox, right? And yeah, IE used to be the major player, but since Microsoft got complaint from the EU because they are accused of practicing monopoly, because in every Windows there will be Internet Explorer, and other browser competitors feel that the market share for them are monopolized by IE. So back then in 2000, European Union sued Microsoft, and apparently they won. So IE, so Windows installation on computers installed in European Union region needs to provide an option to install a browser beside IE. And since then, yeah, web browser becomes more various, and now we have collection of Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and still Internet Explorer and Microsoft Edge. But now the tables already turned, the majority now using Chrome, and yeah, I won't delve deeper to this issue because it sometimes gets very political and touches the belief system of developers. Some probably try to be avoid tied to Google's ecosystem, so they rather use Firefox, but others don't really care about that and just simply use Chrome or any browser that derived from Chrome. But yeah, anyway, the support for HTML text and CSS may vary across browsers, so you need to check if the web browser that will be used by users can actually support the HTML and CSS syntax that you put in the web pages of your website. And yeah, I already mentioned this before. HTML5 introduces a more semantically meaningful text. Before HTML5, if we want to define header, navigation bar, the main content, we had to use div container. But now we already have a more specific HTML text to express the layout element for navigation bar, for the header, for the section in an article, and so on. Because by having a more semantically readable markup or HTML text, it will be also beneficial for users who might have accessibility problems to access the web pages. We might have not experienced any of this, but there are also some people who have disability in terms of their vision or their hearing impairment, and they can be helped by their assisting devices for browsing the web pages. So for those who have visual impairment, they can be assisted if the HTML web pages that they open contain a more semantically meaningful HTML text, so that their assisting devices can provide output that is coherent to the visual impaired user. Just imagine that if you are visually impaired and the device that is used by you parse the HTML tag, and most likely the HTML tag will be read as is. So imagine that when you cannot see anything when browsing a web page, and then your web browser will dictate the web pages for you. Yeah, it will dictate something like div and then the content. But if you are defining your web pages using a more semantically meaningful markup, like in HTML5, we can have a specific tag for expressing a navigation bar or a section. The assisting device for those visually impaired person can produce a more correct output that can be heard by those visually impaired person. And also, in addition, it should also enriched by HTML attributes to help those accessibility issues have experienced by the users that may have any kind of disabilities. But yeah, that's another issue. It is might not that important for now, but if you are trying to design web pages to be more inclusive, not only for normally able person, but also person with disabilities, you may need to consider the accessibility features in several HTML tags and also attributes. And yeah, lastly, HTML5 especially important because by having the recent development in HTML and JavaScript, we can eliminate the need of plugins such as Flash or Java. Maybe in your childhood before, if you already exposed to internet since early childhood, you might remember there were several sites where you can play games and you need to install Flash plugin in your web browser or Java applet in your web browser. But now, since 2016 or 17, I forgot, Flash is deprecated, so any Flash content out there is not supported at these times. So gone the games that were developed using Flash or even Java applet. And especially Java applet is a factor for security issues. So thankfully it was deprecated and also removed from web browser. Yeah, usually Java, while their intention is good to provide code that can run anywhere, but that also introduces the possibility to run malicious code everywhere. So yeah, even the intention is good, but it was misused pretty much back then. So yeah, thankfully Java was removed from the browser. Okay, I already explained this before. So we have a more readable and semantically coherent elements like navigation, header, footer, and so on. And for the input types, we can also make the input to be more specific. For example, we can actually designate an input to accept that time value, or make it into an input that handle email address. So it will only accept a valid email string if the input type is set to email. If you only set it to text, then you can put any text into it. And even if you put an invalid email address, invalid formatted email address, then it is still acceptable in plain text input. But if you use input type set to email, then the input will only accept a valid email address in terms of its format. So it will perform syntax checks on the email, whether it is a correct format of email address or not. The question whether the address is actually exists or not is not handled by the HTML tag. That is the responsibility of the backend system or the web application to figure out whether the email address is valid or not. By checking the existing database or just plain send the email to the given address and see whether the target address will return an error or not. And the structure actually similar to the one that in Mozilla's document, right? So if we try to compare it side by side, where is it? We have the header with navigation, and we have this sidebar, and this can be defined by an HTML tag here, and then the content is defined as a section, if you remember correctly from the text here. And the menus in the sidebar is defined by using ordered list by the OL tag here. OL means ordered list. So the default behavior usually each item will have a number or an order in each item, but apparently it is overridden by the CSS, so it doesn't display any order or any number in the list item. And if we go to the bottom, we can also see the footer of the web page. So and those contents are enclosed in the more semantically what do you call it, meaningful HTML tag. Before HTML5, all of this header, nav, aside, section, article, and footer must be defined using div container. And that, while it does work, but semantically wise, it doesn't make sense. But usually the one that will read and display the HTML tag is web browser, and web browser is a program. As long as the program can read and understand the HTML tag, they can display it. But remember, if we want to create a good code and also good web design, we have to think not only the program that will read the HTML page, but also the person that will develop the pages. So it will be very helpful if we start by using the HTML5 to provide a more semantically meaningful text that can help not only the developer but also other person who may require additional assistance in reading the HTML content that we wrote in the web browser. So that's HTML, and HTML usually only for layout. To make it more colorful or make it look prettier, it will require CSS. So you can see in the examples here, a plain HTML versus at the same HTML but with CSS style sheets. So if you look at the HTML, the plain HTML, well, it does contain several elements like the image. Image can be displayed immediately in the web page, but how the texts are displayed are basically still following the default behavior for rendering or displaying the HTML text by the browser. So it still follows the default settings. And remember, when we develop web pages, we also develop the identity or the style of the website. If you are okay, or if you don't mind to be considered as the ordinary or just the default designer who didn't who feel okay if the web pages is rendered simply in black and white style, then yeah, that's your choice. But usually we want to express our own identity. And also if you work on a company also have their identity, right? For example, if in this faculty, our logo, our faculty mark has this color scheme consisting of blue and red. And that is our identity as the Faculty of Computer Science. Therefore, if we develop web apps or systems to be used in this faculty, we try to make it look like developed and used in this faculty. So if you see the website of our faculty, yeah, the color scheme is mainly blue and red because that is the identity of our faculty. If we make the color scheme differently, like make it a plain blue, then it become Faculty of Engineering, for example, because Faculty of Engineering color is mainly blue in their logo. But yeah, apparently the website mainly using white color. But in Fasilkom, in our faculty, the web page comprises of two colors, blue and red, because that is the identity of our faculty. And yeah, so back to the issue of designing web pages. So make sure at least have some effort to style your page to look like an identity or express what the web pages will look like to your users. For example, you can learn about theory of colors, and according to these colors, there are several colors that evokes what it's called emotional effect to the person who sees it. So yeah, if we want to make the web page or the content looks more calm or cool to make it easier to see, maybe I'm not a psychologist or color expert, so I cannot really say much about this issue, but yeah, according to this theory of online color theory, if you, for example, if you make your pages looks bright, then it will evoke a sense of well, active, energetic to your users. So maybe when they see a bright colored web pages, it makes them energized, getting more energized. But if the web page's color is toward bluish or greenish color, it evokes a sense of calm or coolness, and maybe it can be used to make the user feel more comfortable, feel more cozy when viewing your content. But yeah, that's the theory of color. We don't really discuss it in this course. If I remember correctly, in the course about interaction design, in fact, yeah, interaction design or interaction system. Yeah, it's either I kind of forgot the name. That course discusses more in depth about the issues of designing user interface that will feel useful and also joyful to the users. You should take that course. But yeah, I remember, if I'm not wrong, it is a mandatory course in international class program back then, but I don't really know whether it is still a mandatory course in your cohort. But yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so that's about HTML and CSS. Any questions so far? And yeah, let me put some disclaimers. I'm a back-end person, so I'm more focused. I have more experiences in developing the server-side code instead of client-side code. So yeah, I cannot really help much, but at least I am capable to use CSS, but not in an expert way. So if there are any questions, I can try to answer it as best as I could. But if it gets very technical, I'm afraid I cannot really help much in CSS. So if there are no questions, so let's move on to the next slide. So previously HTML is for layouting. Now CSS is used for providing styles to the HTML document. It's like you have a house, then you have the rooms built in the house, and then the next thing to do is to apply the styling to your rooms. For example, what kind of tiles you want to put in your bathroom, or what kind of wallpaper you will put in the bedroom, and so on. Because if you only have plain walls and bricks, it doesn't look aesthetically pleasing, right? So you need to have some paints or wallpapers or marbles to be put in the walls and also in the flooring of your house. CSS and HTML is similar to that. HTML is the house, the walls, the floors, the roof. But then the CSS is the styles, the paints, the wallpapers, and also any decorations that we apply or we put in the house to make the house aesthetically pleasing and comfy to live in. For those who are familiar with computer games, it's like playing The Sims. Okay, so we can create rooms by putting walls in The Sims, and then we can put some paints, wallpapers to the walls. It's like that. And the syntax of CSS is as follows. So it will begin with a selector. This will be a reference to a tag or a class or an ID in the HTML document. But for now, selector is the pointer to an element in the HTML tag. In the example, it happened the selector is H1, which referring to every H1 text in the HTML document. But later, selector can also referring to an ID attribute found in the HTML text, and also a class found in the HTML document. And there are also several other selector variations, which we will see later. So for now, we have selector, and it is then followed by a pair of property and value. So for example, if we want to style the heading heading 1 to have blue color, and the font size of that heading text is set to 12 pixels, then we can use this CSS. So let me use one example. I'm not editing Django source code directly. What I'm going to do is editing a web page in the web browser. So in the web browser, you can use developer tools in the case of Google Chrome and its variants like Brave or Edge. Usually the shortcut to toggle the developer tools is F12. And if we use F12, we can inspect the style applied to the web page. So we can see in the style applied to this page. Let's see. The style for this your to-do list. So your to-do list here is a caption tag. And there is one class, CSS class applied to this tag. And we can see that particular class make the caption to have this CSS applied. So for example, there are a lot of CSS properties applied to this caption class. To pick one example, the simplest one is the color. So the color applied to this caption is RGB 108, 117, 125. And if we want to make this to another color, yeah, we can also do so. Let's say make it bluish. So we can change the color value of that applied to that caption HTML tag. So yeah, when you are developing a web page, there are actually two approaches in designing your web page. You can modify the values from the deployed application or the one that is running in your development server and try to play around with the value in the developer tools. Once you are satisfied, you take note and then apply it to the CSS source code that you already have. Or the other way around, you modify the CSS source code and then see the result in the rendered web page. Well, it depends on the language and also the framework that you use. I follow this approach because the original web application here is developed in Java. So this is not a Django application, but rather this is a web application developed in Java. And there is no auto reload functionality like in Django. Whenever you make changes in your source code, it is automatically applied to your web pages, right? That is not such the case in Java. So the one that I demonstrated here is the workflow that I follow when developing web pages in Java. I try to play around with the rendered value here in the developer tools, and then I apply it back to the actual CSS here in the source code. Well, actually, there is no custom CSS. That page simply use existing classes provided by Bootstrap CSS framework, which we will see later. If we want to override it, then yeah, we can create the CSS here and then put the overriding values in that CSS. But yeah, that's one example of the workflow. And how to define CSS? There are several ways to do that. We can put it inline, so we put it in the HTML tag. Or we put it externally, so we have a separate file in different file from the HTML file. The one that demonstrated to you since the tutorial is the CSS file that is put in different directory. But you can also actually define your own CSS in the HTML page. So for example, you can put some styling here. dictate that the H1 is colored blue. That's possible. Or you put it within or inline in the HTML tag. Color green, for example. That's also possible. However, the best practice usually we put the CSS in external file. So the HTML is clean from CSS in the file. But I wanted to ask you something here. What do you think the reason why it is recommended to put the external style sheets in separate file from the HTML file? Does anyone have opinion or guess about the reasons why this practice is the recommended one instead of just put every CSS style in the HTML page? Nobody? Okay. Well, this is just for some things to ponder or to think about in your free time. Let's say you have multiple pages where it turns out this is not that complex, but let's imagine that you have this H1 style is set to be colored to green. H1 here. Let's say you have several H1, then in every H1 you define the color must be blue. Suppose you have this H1 in multiple HTML files and suddenly you have a request from your client. He said that he do not want the H1 or the heading text to be green color. He wanted the heading to be red color. Think about what the changes that you have to make. Let's say you have 100 HTML pages. In every 100 HTML pages, you already have this H1 in those pages where the style is defined inline or in the H1 tag. When your client requested the color to be replaced from blue to green, how many changes you have to make? Do you only is it only one change? Or you have to make 100 changes across every HTML pages that using H1 text. So yeah, just imagine that scenario if you put inline style, CSS style in your HTML page. That's why it's better to use an externally maintained style sheets. Okay, this is the slide about selector. So to be more precise, selector can referring to element, class, or ID. And you will see later, selector can also have some variations. For example, a selector to an element and the style is only applied when that element is producing or triggering a certain condition, like when we hover our mouse on top of that element, there is also a selector for that. So let's, for example, if we hover to top of a heading text, we can make the color to transform from the default one to, let's say, red or green. And then when we move our mouse cursor out of the heading text, then the color will return to the default color. There's a selector for that. And yeah, maybe you already noticed a meme in the Discord server, but I'm not really sure whether it is appropriate to display. Yeah, in short, the meme here is the one that posted that image in Discord server mentioned about, oh, somebody knows how to center a div. And it is true that positioning is a really challenging issue in CSS. So in CSS, we have relative positioning and also absolute positioning. By relative positioning, we define the position of element relative to another element in the same page. But then there is also absolute positioning where we actually define the exact coordinate where the element should be placed in the web page. So we can actually put the coordinate like in the XY position where the element should be placed. But there will be issues later on if we use absolute positioning in CSS, because we cannot really sure that every device will actually able to display that element in the specified coordinate, right? Because now we have so many variation of devices that can access the web pages, a web page, not only by using web browser, but also by using what do you call it? The web browser and in the smartphone, where the dimension is usually not as big as the web browser in desktop or in the computer. So since there are a lot of variation in terms of window dimension in various devices, the latest standard in CSS to provide positioning is using what is called as flexbox. But for disclaimer, I'm not familiar with how flexbox work in web, but at least I have coded flexbox in web in mobile application. So to give you one example, okay, so this is a code from different realm or programming language. So this is a code based on a mobile application that I work on from 2019. And let's say, let's see the code for the menu, I guess. Is it, well, yeah. So while at it, I try to also display the screenshot. So let's wait a minute. So this is the screenshot from the mobile app. And this front page, the one that has infant rundown, keynote button, parallel sessions, is actually one example of flexbox that is defined in the code here. So while this is different from flexbox in ordinary CSS, but the concept is still similar. So for example, for these three buttons in the middle of the screen, each shortcut or button is aligned in the center of the box. The box here referring to, how can I draw this? This part. And the items is aligned center, which means instead of putting the items in the starting from the leftmost part of the box that contain those containers or buttons, the items will be put immediately in the center of the box. So this is the box. Maybe I can draw it better using tablet. So this red highlighted part is the box. So the items, the three buttons here will be put in the center. And then the flex direction means inside that box, put all items sequentially in a row. So the layout engine, it could be your web browser, or in this case, the what is called, yeah, it's actually a web-based technology as well, but yeah, let's say it, a web browser will put items in a row. So it will put it sequentially as items from left to right in that box. Because there's an alternative in text direction, if I remember correctly, there's an option for column. So instead of rendering each item in a line or in a row, the direction to display the items will be in column basis. So from top to bottom, bottom. And in that box, the content is spaced evenly. So the space between each items in this box is automatically spaced in even pixels automatically by the rendering engine or the layout engine. And yeah, that's one example. The code that you see is similar to CSS, but that is actually a JavaScript code. Why is that? Because that's the programming language that I use to develop this this mobile application. But the practice in CSS should be similar. So in CSS, later on in your tutorial or in your group project assignment, and also in your individual assignment, the CSS that you write will be a CSS. But yeah, the structure or the look-alike from the one that you see now and the CSS that you will write will look similar. It just, yeah, this is written in JavaScript that happen to also define the styling aspects of the pages in the mobile application. But in the case of creating web pages, then you will have a separate CSS file that contain the selectors and then the properties that is applied to that selector. In this example, well, this is applied to, let's see, to this component, and this component is applied to the, well, not that one, this view, which is the box, is put with the what is called the style here. So that's example from different realm about text box, but in CSS it should be similar in CSS that is used in web pages. You will learn more in the tutorial later in your assignment. Now we still have some time. Let's see. Yeah, CSS that have name cascading, and it actually means something. It's similar to the concept of inheritance that you learn in the object-oriented programming language. So we can have styles defined from several sources, and the sources will dictate the order of application of that particular style. So the highest order here will will override the rules defined in the lower orders. So in terms of origin, you can define the CSS like the one that you provide in your application. So the one that is coming from CSS you wrote. And user can also override the CSS applied to the web browser. So if you look in your browser configuration, let me open setting. Actually, we can do that. I think I can. Where is it located in brief? Not here. I can show it in Firefox. Let me open my Firefox. Let's see, where is my Firefox again? In the settings, you can define your own custom color that will be applied to web pages. So let's say if you want to make every web pages to use, let's say, Comic Sans, then you can do that from your Firefox. So you set the default font to Comic Sans or the other font that you want, or even you can define the colors. Let's say you want to make links that already been visited to be colored in red or green. You can also do that from within the Firefox, and Firefox will override the CSS in the web pages. And when applying CSS, the order that will be applied to your tag will begin from the one that is defined inline in your HTML tag. So if you already defined CSS from an external file, and then you redefine it in a tag that happened to be also applied from the external file, then the style defined in the HTML tag will override anything that already defined from the external CSS file. So let's say you have style.css where the h1 is color equal to blue, and then in the web page you have h1, the same h1 has an inline defined style where the color is set to red, then the color equal to red here will take precedence. So instead of displaying the text in blue color, the web browser will display the text in red color. And suppose you have also this kind of scenario where you use multiple CSS in a document, then the second style sheets here will take precedence, will override anything that is defined in the first style sheets. And yeah, similar to the object-oriented concept, CSS tags also inherits from previously applied CSS values. So let's say you have a div tag here where the font family is monospace and the color is red. Then actually this div style also inherit the div style defined in the style tag in the heading part of the web page. So the result or the final style that applied into the div tag is actually background color set to initial, color is set to red, and then the font family is set to monospace. And since div is usually used as container, then any text that is defined as child of div, i.e. the text, the child is put in between of the opening and the closing tag of div, those tags will inherit the style from the div container. So every paragraph text or anchor link text will have their font to use a monospace font family when they put or declare in the div container as the children of div container. So yeah, that's about CSS. So use CSS to define style to your web pages. Well, it is okay to just write the page in black and white without using any styles at all. But remember, each web page has their own identity, their purpose, and to make it look more attractive and aesthetically pleasing to the user. Eventually, most likely, you need to have some styles applied to the web pages. Yeah, for an analogy, you would not like to live in a house that where the walls are simply bricks, right? You want to have it colored or put some wallpapers on the walls. Just think about that analogy when developing web pages. At minimum, try to make it aesthetically pleasing and not simply a black and white web pages. But yeah, CSS is hard. Well, not hard. For some people, it's quite easy and even challenging and very pleasant to work with. But that's yeah. Some might have preference to work on front end or work with how to define the look-alike of the web pages. But if we want to create CSS, especially create it by our own from zero, it will be very challenging. So usually we resort to CSS framework or toolkit. Especially now we have multiple devices. Some people might use web browser in the smartphone. Others may use or access our website from web browser in the desktop computer. So, and we need to ensure how the website look like is consistent and aesthetically pleasing in both and across multiple variation of devices. So instead of creating CSS specifically for each possible variation, some smart developers out there already created a framework that we can reuse. One of the example is Bootstrap. So by default, Bootstrap already include several default CSS style that immediately apply even if we haven't declared our own custom style. So let's see one example. So this is a code example from the tutorial. I haven't done anything with the tutorial, so let's just try to run tutorial. But now the tutorial loads CSS and also the Bootstrap CSS framework, and let's see the result. So the result is, yeah, this is the hello world. Notice that the texts are aligned very closely near the border of the window. as if it doesn't have any margin or padding. I sometimes forgot the difference between margin or padding, but if you look at it, it doesn't have any margin. Yeah, margin. It doesn't have a margin from the box that contain this HTML element with the border or the window of the web browser. This is because Bootstrap reset the default behavior, the default CSS used by web browser. So let's see what happens if we don't input Bootstrap in the style sheet. And let me run it again and open the same page. This is the same pages, but without Bootstrap applied. So this is the default styling applied by web browser if the web page doesn't have any CSS style. So Bootstrap kind of provided the default setting, or usually in framework speak, they often use this term of opinionated. So they have their own opinion on how the default web page should look like when there is no style sheet applied. So according to Bootstrap, according to the opinion of Bootstrap developers, this is their opinion about default style of a web page without custom CSS. You see that the text is really padded to, or the text doesn't have any margin to the window of the web browser. So that's the opinion of the Bootstrap developers. And sometimes we are pretty okay with that. And even if we don't want to follow that opinion, and we can also customize our own style, right? So we can define our own style here in the CSS. Okay, we want to make color is set to blue. Well, it doesn't apply. Should I set this? Interesting. So it includes a thing. Not really. Wait a minute. How come it doesn't render? Let's see the. Wait. It's H5. No, no, not that. It's in the project Django or example templates. Interesting. Why the style why the style doesn't apply there? The style already defined here, but why it is not overridden? Interesting. Oh well. Sometimes that happens. But yeah, I hope you got the idea. If we don't want to follow the opinionated style defined by Bootstrap or any CSS framework defined by the framework maker, then we can define our own style and then use it to override the provided style from the framework. So yeah, you can use either copy the Bootstrap into your web page, into your project, as I did here. So I put the Bootstrap CSS and JavaScript into the static folder, and then ensure it is loaded from the CSS directory. Or you can also follow the guide outlined in the tutorial. In the tutorial, I believe the instruction was to require you to use this to load the files from CDN gsdeliver.net. Either way works. You can include Bootstrap style sheets and the JavaScript files along with your application in the static directory. You can do that. And the other alternative is by using CDN. Both way works. But sometimes there is a consideration which you need to factor when you deal with deployment issue, when you are trying to deploy your application. First, if you use CDN, let me open this again. If you use CDN, then your web browser or user's web browser, to be more general, will load not only resources from your web application that already deployed on a server, but also load some resources from other server on the CDN network. So the web browser will make two connections. First to your web application, and then second to the CDN server. While it is okay, but sometimes there might be some requirements that require you to put your CSS and JavaScript in the application. For example, if your client tells you to do so, because the application is likely to be used in their internal network, for example, where the application can only be accessed through a private network that cannot be accessed from external in public network. So when you are connected to the internal private network in a company, then the resources related to CSS or JavaScript used in the internal web application might need to be included in the web application directly instead of loading it from the CDN network, because the constraint of the network that is used to access the web application. Or since we are using CDN as well, then we have to take factor of the possibility the CDN is down. So if the CDN is down, then what about the styles that will be displayed or required by the web pages? If the CDN is down, then the web pages that we have in the web application will be displayed in plain black and white, right? So it adds additional possible point of failure in the web application. If the CDN server is down, then obviously the JavaScript, the client-side script, and also the style sheet related to Bootstrap will not able loaded by your web application. And if CDN is happen to be quite remote, not close to your client browser, then it will affect also to the performance. So let's say it turns out the CDN is located at Singapore, while your application is deployed in Jakarta, in data center somewhere in Jakarta. Then in terms of distance, Singapore is more distant from Jakarta, right? So it should be more faster if we load the actual CSS and JavaScript from our server that is in Jakarta instead of from CDN at Singapore. So that's also one factor or one thing that needs to be considered when deciding whether to use CDN or static files when as the source for loading the Bootstrap CSS framework or even other CSS or JavaScript libraries. Usually they provide two mechanisms, either by using CDN or bundle it into your own application. So yeah, that one example. And to style your button, well, you can use several examples in the Bootstrap. For this example, I am going to use previous application that I wrote in Java. Not that one. This is actually a plain web application that styled only using classes from Bootstrap. And as you can see, it's quite good. I mean, even it still looks black and white, it's still more aesthetically pleasing than simple black and white without Bootstrap. So, for example, to define this table, you can see in the Bootstrap documentation, there are several variations of classes that you can use to style your table header. In this example, I use table dark. So what will happen if I change this to table light? It will use another class provided by Bootstrap that will render the table header to look bright instead of dark. And yeah, this can be restored again to black. Why it doesn't revert back to black? Okay, yeah. It needs to be reloaded apparently. And as for the items in the navigation bar here, or the header, yeah, for example, the text currently using dark, but it can use another class, text dash light, to make it maybe to use a brightly colored font. And yeah, for example, for the header itself, there is a class that defines there should be a border in the bottom of the header element, and this can be changed. Let's say if I remove that border bottom, see that the border at the bottom of the element vanished. The border is gone. So even by using default Bootstrap, we can do many styling to the web pages, and it could be better if we also define specific colors that are aesthetically pleasing for the users. But yeah, for my purpose here, since this application is actually as a part of a training course, so yeah, the main aspect is the training part, not designing the web pages. So yeah, I just make it in this way, just using minimal style. So yeah, that's one example by using Bootstrap, and also several other components that you can explore in the Bootstrap's documentation. All right. Let me check that there is no question in YouTube and also Zoom. So yeah, we already reached the end of the, well, not reached the end. We still have 2 minutes. Okay. So lastly, we have static files. I've explained this before in the tutorial sessions because there was someone asked about this during the tutorial session. But to summarize it in 2 minutes, remember that when developing a web application, you need to handle URL routing, right? Because the incoming request may request for particular resources. One resource that request my request is a request to invoke a function in your views.py. However, since you are developing a web application, your web application will also contain other files that are not related to Python functionality, right? Or any computation that is performed by Python, such as the files to request image or CSS file or JavaScript file. Therefore, Django needs to distinguish the request to those static files, the images, JavaScript, or CSS, or even uploaded files, user uploaded files, and also the resources that is related to functions invoked and that defined in the views.py. So Django needs to distinguish those resources, the static file and the Python functions. Therefore, Django provides this static file mechanism. So we declare for those resources under certain path, then those resources are actually handled, for example, by a web server instead of the built-in application server in Django. So those requests can access the files directly and simply retrieve it to the user's web browser. And for other requests that is not requesting static files, the handling of those requests are delegated to the views.py in Django. Because there are several considerations, like it is faster to fetch the files that already static that won't change over time, and depends on your web server. You can also implement caching, so the subsequent requests to the same static files can be retrieved much faster if those static files are requested pretty often. And that's it for today. Any questions while waiting for me to display the code for labeling your attendance? No questions yet. Okay, maybe when in the tutorial session, you will have more things to discuss in the tutorial session. So this is the code to mark your attendance in LMS or in Skilly. So the code for today's session is 1MJ23U. So I copy pasted it to the chat as well. So I think that's all for today. So to sum up, now we begin to focus on the front end of a web application, because previously we already discussed about the backend part, implementing Python files. Now we move to the front end where we have to define the layout, pages, and also later on in next week, we will see how we can add interactivity in the client side by using JavaScript in the code, in the HTML file. So any questions before I end today's session? Not yet. No questions so far. Okay, so I think that's all for today. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, I'm sorry, last week I wasn't able to come to the lab session. I have to ask the TAs to deliver the tutorial material. Turns out I have to fill in training, so yeah, I have to handle that. But yeah, in this Thursday, I can attend the tutorial session. So yeah, I think I will see you all in this Thursday. So thank you everyone, and bye bye.